next time I go out to a restaurant, I'm gonna be like, don't be putting me at that booth. No. My boy Jim told me what happens at that booth.
Oh my god. Ugh. Same thing with theaters, man. Anyway, so I guess we should probably intro the show.
Well, welcome everybody to episode 2 of the Game In podcast. I'm Blitz, and this is my co-host Jim. We're super stoked to be back for another episode. It's an actual series now, rather than just an idea. Getting the second episode out. We wanted to talk about several big things that are happening in the industry right now. The Switch 2 launches this week, and we have some things we want to talk about with that. And there's also been a lot of stuff going on with the VA industry for video games that we want to talk about and we want to cover.
Yeah, there's a lot. And not only that, there's a lot of VA stuff happening lately. Most recently, the recasting of VAs probably in Persona 4 Remake. And that's not the only thing that's been happening with that realm. We got a lot to talk about in the VA realm today, just because of that those tweets about Persona 4 Remake.
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess we should talk about the big topic, I guess, that we have today is the Nintendo Switch 2, right? It launches next week on the 5th. By the time we're recording, this is about 2 weeks before then, but it'll be a week
It's
before
next week.
when we actually. Oh, it is next.
Yeah, it's next Friday.
For the viewers listening at home, we are recording this on the 30th. And oh my god, it is on Thursday.
Yeah.
Huh. Man, time moves fast, man. Anyway.
It does.
But
Switch so are you getting a Switch 2?
I've jumped back and forth about this, right? I wish I actually woke up in time now, right? I wish I woke up in time to actually participate in the pre-ordering process, right? I probably wouldn't have gotten it, but I am more interested now than I was before, right? Just so I could just play older games on it, right? I know you were talking, we were talking a bit offline of this. You wanted to play the Xenoblade Chronicles on the Switch 2 because they have the potential to run better, right?
Yeah, and so I did end up getting one. I got very lucky. There's a local game shop where I live. Shout out to BitJump Games. And I brought in my original PS5. I have a PS5 Pro. I'm that guy. But I brought in my original PS5 and I was able to get trade-in on it and put that towards a Switch 2 pre-order. Which I don't think I would have gotten a Switch 2 just based on spending $450 on it. I don't think I was going to get one at launch. But because I was able to get trade-in value, I went and did it. And I think that may be the same for a lot of people. I think there was a lot of sticker shock initially with the Switch 2 being $450. For me, initially, I was like, oh, $450 does sound a lot, especially compared to the Switch 1. The Switch 1's kind of maintained that $300 price point. But as I thought about it more, I think I have in my head the idea that the Switch 2 is like the budget console that runs things slower and not as nice. But, the PS5 and the Xbox X launched 4 years ago at a similar price point and were able to do the 4K 60 and the things that, the Switch is promising. And so in my mind, I don't see why the Switch 2 couldn't provide that same level of power 5 years later at a $450 price point. In my mind, it looks like they're finally showing up to play with the big boys and to put out that level of power on a console. But you and I were talking earlier, you understand a little more of the actual tech specs of the Switch 2.
Yeah, I did.
What do you think on the 450 price point if it's actually going to do what's promised?
So it is an NVIDIA chip, right? It's based on the Ampere system, which was mostly what the RTX 3000 series was based off of. I think I was reading somewhere it did have, I think, uh, one 1500, around 1500 CUDA cores, which, if you don't know what that means, that's okay. Um, Basically, it's about as good as an RTX 3050 laptop, basically. And now, while I'm gonna preface this, that doesn't sound that great, right? Um, I want to make this point, right? Nintendo's MO has never been about let's put out the most highest fidelity thing we possibly can, right? That's never been their thing. Um, and that should have been that should have been clear since the Wii, right? When they were
Yeah.
still releasing a 480p console, when everybody was going to 720p, 1080p. The Wii didn't have it had RCA cables, right? They didn't have an HDMI, if I remember correctly, right?
They upgraded later. You could buy a cable that would do HDMI, but it didn't upscale anything.
It didn't ship with it, right?
Yeah, it was purely just so you could hook it into a new TV.
Right. And I think for what it is, I think for what they are trying to sell for $450, I think it is perfectly fine, especially with what prices are looking at. And that's a different discussion we'll get into a little bit later. But you also have, thinking about it now, the technical specs, they'll probably have DLSS, which is the upscaling.
So AI is doing some heavy lifting to make the 4K 60 happen, is what you're saying.
DLSS isn't really 4K, or not 4K. It can be 4K, right? It isn't necessarily AI per se, right? It can definitely be assisted with AI, right? It's more of now I don't want to get too much into the technical jargon, right? But it does.
Let's get in a little bit to it, because it is something that I'm curious about. So is it like, because I hear AI upscaling, but is it AI in like the way that we think of like the generative AI, or is it like algorithm based upscaling?
Right. It's, if I remember correctly, and someone in the comments can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but it is more algorithm than, everybody likes to throw around the AI word, and they're all like, oh, machine learning and everything, and that's true, right? But for the Nintendo Switch 2, I don't think so. DLSS 4 is probably where most of the AI stuff comes into play, because I have a newer graphics card, the 50 series, right, of graphics card for NVIDIA, right? And that uses more of the AI features and stuff like that. But I wouldn't necessarily call it 100% AI, right? A lot of that is these hard engineers doing work with their anti-aliasing. That's all a DLSS is at the end of the day. It's upscaling it into aliasing, right?
Okay.
So at the end of the day, that's really what it kind of dwindles down to on a high level, right?
Yeah, and I got the PS5 Pro, and a lot of it's the same thing. It's that upscaling to achieve 4K 60.
Right.
Because an example I'll give is FF7 Rebirth. I turned on because I played the whole game in 4K and 30 on my PS5, and then I got my Pro. And what I noticed was when you turn on the 4K 60, the render distance of things is the same as when you're running the 1080p 60 frames a second. Like if you turn it on to the 4K 30, things render a lot farther out, and it's all like, oh, they've just taken the 1080p 60 settings and upscaled them to 4K.
Yes, that's what's
happening.
Right?
They're not re-optimizing, they're not changing draw distance or anything. It's an upscale.
Right. It's an upscale, but it also is different than traditional upscaling, where it starts to fill in the blanks, right? And that's where most of the NVIDIA press releases, the press conferences, they're like, oh, we're using AI with DLSS 4, right, to kind of fill in the blanks for what this upscaling is doing, right?
Gotcha.
And I don't know if it did mention anywhere about frame generation as well, because that's a huge thing that has, it's a very controversial thing actually.
Yeah, if your
when,
frames are real or not.
yeah, if your frames are real. I am personally more of the camp that I'm perfectly fine with frame generation. I think the kind of solid rule is if you're running 60 FPS and above, just by doing that, you're fine to run frame generation, because it does cause input lag for one, right? If you're playing a single player game, you're probably not going to notice it too much. Now if you're playing like a competitive game, right? Or like a Counter-Strike, or anything of that kind of nature, you will probably notice the impact, the input delay if you start doing frame generation. But at that point, you're probably not even using upscaling. All these competitive games aren't too extensive on the graphics, and most of the time too, most competitive gamers, they don't put any of that nice stuff on. They put that stuff on low, and they're fragging out, bro.
Yeah, I saw a video of someone playing League of Legends at like 480p, low graphics, everything, but they're at like 1,000 frames a second, and they're like, I can see the world before it happens.
Exactly. So, I don't get the conversation between, there is some artifacting that goes on. It depends on what kind of variation you use as well. I can tell you NVIDIA's version of frame generation is better than AMD's, but they have been catching up, so they're not as bad as they used to be anymore, right? They're actually pretty on par. Like if you compare FSR, which is what the PlayStation is kind of based off of, right? Because they run an AMD chip.
So I do remember when the PlayStation came out, watching a bunch of side-by-side videos because I was trying to understand the tech. So PlayStation has invented their own algorithm. They call it PLSS. And I think it is similar to AMD because they are running an AMD chip. But I do remember people doing the side-by-sides and being like, DLSS is still the best. PLSS is surprisingly close. AMD is still further behind. So what PlayStation accomplished actually seemed to be better than the stock AMD.
Than FSR. Yeah. At the time, I think when it came out, I think it was still at 2. And yeah, I mean, so getting back to the price, right, for the Switch 2, $450. And mind you, this architecture is about 2 generations old now, right? So $450 for what you're getting, and mind you, it's not just the graphics inside the system, right? You also have the screen, you also have the controllers, which are a butt ton. We'll get to that later, right?
Well, and I mean, also the idea that it is a handheld, the idea that you can pick it up and take it with you, rather than getting a separate device for remoting in and things like that.
Same thing with the dock. You're buying here's what you're buying. You're buying the dock, you're buying the console, which comes with the screen, right? And the graphics and the CPU and everything. So like the machine, basically. You're buying the controller, right? If you add those all up together, I think it makes sense, right? I think it does justify the $450 price point, in my opinion.
Yeah. And that's, I don't think it's too expensive. I just think it is expensive. But like, I think they've justified what you're getting.
Yeah, it's not the most expensive that's ever been released, right? The PlayStation 3, when that released, that was $600.
Yeah,
right?
the PS3 still holds the crown. Well, I guess technically the PS5 Pro is the first to ever overthrow it at 700. But the base PS3 was 600 in 2006. Is when that dropped. I mean, and I mean, we definitely saw that hurt console sales. The PS3 is still one of the lowest selling PlayStation consoles. And I think I think that is a true example of too expensive at the time. Even in 2006, when, you know, the economy was bumping. This is pre-2008 crisis. Like, things were good. I think people still had pause at a $600 price point. I mean, you know, I bought a PS5 Pro, because I was very blessed to be in a good financial situation where I could do that. But I mean, I went back and forth on it a lot. And I mean, there are days where I still sit back and go, was this worth it? Like, should I have done this? Like, I think past the $500 price point, you definitely get pause. But I mean, like, that's probably my threshold is 500. What's your threshold of like where, man, no, this is out of hand?
Oh, geez. that's a topic, right? For a console, I think 500. I think that's the kind of upper limit for me, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
Because to be fair, my graphics card is more than $500, right? And
so on a
hurt.
PC, you're willing to spend.
Was I willing to spend it? That's I mean, I did spend it, but my, you know, was I happy about?
Do you have the buyer's remorse today?
I do not. Do I have the buyer's remorse? No, I do not have the buyer's remorse. But it was a harder pill to swallow, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, I started PC gaming around when the 9070 came out, and I remember 9070 was about, well, I think it was about $399 or something. Dude, when I bought it. Right?
My first laptop for streaming and content creation ran a 9070.
Yeah. And, you know, components were cheaper back then, right? So it's like everything's gone up. I mean, you have the price of the 5090 being like $2,000 roughly, right? Actually more than $2,000 because you can't even buy it. And you know, this is we're getting into the weeds here, right? With graphics cards, because, you know, I'm gonna admit this right to everybody's face. I did buy a 5070. Now, there's very controversial opinions on the 5070, right? But I want to preface this. It was the only graphics card that you could buy at MSRP.
I was going to ask, did you buy scalpers, or did you get an actual 5070?
This was a legit 5070 from no scalpers. I bought it from Newegg. And this was the only thing that you could find at MSRP. Now, the reason why that probably was is people were like, oh, it's 12 gigabytes of VRAM, right? And it's not 16. And I was like, well, I'm gonna be honest with you. I could care less, right?
Yeah.
You know, I just wanted to run these. I bought it because I didn't have my 3070 wasn't doing it, so I switched over to, it just wasn't, it kind of was on its last breath, right? Pretty much.
Yeah.
And I was like, I need to get something, right? I need to get something. So I got a 5070 because it was the only thing that was at MSRP. Now, mind you, if the AMD card, the 9070 XT came out, it did come out. If it actually maintained that MSRP, I think it was $650, right? At MSRP. It's not, right? Not anymore. It's like averaging around $750, $730 at the time of recording right now. And that's just, you know, I don't want to get into the tariffs or whatever. There's a lot of reasons why that is, and just, you know, with stock. So nowadays, you know, when I'm looking at the Switch 2, even though and mind you, I want to repeat myself, you are not going to be buying a Nintendo console for the highest fidelity things you could probably play, right? Yeah. As much as, you know, Breath of the Wild looks pretty, even though it kind of runs a little slow, right? on the Switch, right? By the way, that was also one of the reasons why I was like, I should probably finish Tears of the Kingdom on the Switch. And
that's being able to play Tears of the Kingdom at 4K 60 on the Switch 2 does sound fun to me. you brought up kind of something, you said your 3070 was dying and that, you needed something that would work. And
Right.
I
Yeah.
think a lot of times that's why people go the console route is, they're not worried about all the ins and outs of the tech specs. They just want something that works. And then they want something in their price point. I mean, a lot of people with the PS3, for example, they just waited till the second generation of the PS3 came out. The PS3 Slims were $300. The price cuts as consoles aged on. You talked about getting a 570 new at MSRP, but if you're willing to wait 2 years and get that 570, you can get that 570 for half the price that it used to be.
Hmm.
I think a lot of times when we're making these decisions, it's not even necessarily that we want the best of the best. We want to know that we can put our game in and that it works. We don't want to deal with frame stuttering and a lot of the issues. Like, I look back at games like Cyberpunk. When Cyberpunk first came out, people had top of the line computers and they were the only ones who could run that game, and that
Hmm.
became like this justification of like, oh well, this is why you've got to buy a 3090 or a 3080 or whatever it was at the time, to get past issues with game optimization. um
And that's
but
a
I
different
think
discussion, in my
that is
opinion.
a different discussion with that
That
game
that's a
specifically.
um. So I want to defend the PC crowd because I am the PC crowd. And, I think when people buy a console, like you said, they just want it to work. They don't really care about, honestly, there have been thoughts where I'm just like, man, if I just use my PlayStation 5, I wouldn't have like, running issues with drivers or anything like that. It would have just worked, right? It would have been a smoother experience. I do like to tinker a little bit. That's just me. And this does come with the territory. Um, with tinkering with like PC stuff. When you buy a PC, you're getting into that. You know what you're getting into, right?
Yeah.
Um, with a console, you're expecting that smooth experience, right? And getting to you're not really getting that with any of that stuff. Anyway, um,
But so, I mean, yeah, we talk about that smooth experience with the console, and we talk about pricing and, like all the stuff that you get for a console. And we talked about the price of the Switch being justified, but a lot of times people wait for that price decrease to happen. If they can't justify the price, they wait for the console to come down in like a second generation or something, and then they pull the trigger. Uh it's been kind of weird in the current generation though. For the first time we're seeing midlife increases in price. I believe you have the numbers.
right,
But
yeah.
I know when I bought my PS5, like my first day one PS5, I bought a digital, it was $400.
Hmm.
And now it's $450 to buy a digital of the PS5 Slim.
Is it really now?
Yeah, it's
Really?
$450
450?
for a PS5 Slim digital. It's $550 or it's like $530 for the disc version, and the original disc version was $500.
How
So
much was
those
the
have
Pro when
gone
it
up.
came out?
The Pro was $700 when it came out, and I believe it
Oh,
is
so
still
it's
$700.
it's still at 7. Okay,
Yeah,
that's what
so
I was wondering. Because yeah,
but Xbox as well just announced increases, didn't they? Like a couple
yes.
weeks back.
So right, so they pretty much raised their margins up roughly $100, $80 to $100, right? You have the Series S, went up from for the 512 GB, right? It went up from 300 to 379. Um, the terabyte went up from 349 to 429, right? And the list goes on and on. Controllers went up as well by like about $10 or so, right? And that's just kind of, I am actually genuinely surprised um at Xbox, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest with you because I think this is a topic we're going to touch on later about subscription services as well. Um, to me, I truly believe this, right? Is that Xbox, I don't think I don't think they're going to have another console that we kind of have been known to know. There have been rumors of an Xbox handheld similar to the Steam Deck, similar to the Switch, right? But I don't think that's the route they want to go for because they've proven with Xbox Game Pass, right? Is
Yeah.
that they could that probably makes them more money than these consoles, right?
Well, and that's kind of been the thing for a long time was we kind of knew that consoles sold at a loss.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of recoup that cost in games. And it seems like with the PS5 and the Xbox that the console makers themselves have kind of said, we can't take the loss on the console anymore, at least not as deep as it once was. So we've got to bump up those prices. Xbox could have a future where they're not doing consoles at all. They're trying to make pure profit off Game Pass, selling to people on PC, maybe do a handheld like the Steam Deck that's running PC. It seems like Nintendo, though, may still be on that idea of sell the console at a loss. And the reason I say that is I think the more controversial point on the Switch to over the price of the console has been the game price. We
Of
talk about
$80.
of $80 for Switch 2 games. Now, I want to point out that Nintendo was also one of the first to do $70 games. Tears of the Kingdom came out at $70 towards the latter part of the Switch's life cycle. And now Switch 2 games are looking to be 80. It looks like they're trying to recoup costs from the game perspective. And I don't think every game's going to be 80. I mean, I bought Elden Ring Night Rain last night to play with my brother. And that was a $40 game. Like, I still think there's going to be third-party titles that come in at 50, 40, lower price points. But I think the AAA movement of like first-party games to 80 that Nintendo is starting is to recuperate losses
Right.
on their console. And I mean, if you buy like special editions of games and things like that, you've probably been paying 80 for your games for a while, getting extra things with them. But this jump to 80, I mean, is this too much? Is this too much? Like, what's your initial thoughts?
It depends. This is a lot of the answers for this conversation is it depends, right? There was I'm looking at this tweet right now. It's in our docket, and I'm gonna mention it. And this is relating to Randy Pitchford, right? The CEO still. I think he is.
Of
He's up
Gearbox?
there of Gearbox. He
Yeah.
still is. I think he is. And someone tweeted at him just saying he's like, "Hey, Randy, this game's not going to be 80. This game better not be $80, pretty much, right? Don't take that risk or any of that kind of stuff. You're the CEO. He is the CEO. It says it in this tweet. You're the CEO. You have some say what the price will be when it comes to your publisher, right? And mind you, Randy Pitchford did walk back this comment, right, a little bit later on. But I'm gonna read it out loud, right? Is he basically goes on to say, "Is like A, not my call, but B, if you're a real fan, you'll find a way to make it happen. My local game store had Starflight for a Sega Genesis for $80, and he basically went on to say he worked minimum wage at the ice cream parlor to make it happen, right? And I want to preface this: not the best approach in trying to, go at that argument, right? You know what I mean? Probably not the best, at a very sensitive time like this where we're facing more economic turmoil, right? Probably not the best idea to go and basically say, just work for it harder if you're a true fan, right? I don't think he meant it that way, but he should not have. He should not have said it, right? Yeah.
So definitely, like, you know, I get the point that he's trying to make, with, you know, he mentions the old game being $80 on the Sega Genesis. I do think, you know, we live in a time where games themselves, when you adjust for inflation, are actually cheaper. They are
Hmm.
they are still cheaper than they were in the 90s, in the days of cartridges and how expensive those were to make. And I do think, you know, we talked about the PS3, like consoles are getting cheaper, when you adjust for inflation and some things like that. Uh, but I think you kind of hit the nail on the head of everything in life is getting a little more expensive lately.
Right.
And to tell someone they're not a real fan because they didn't choose your game over getting groceries for a week is really insensitive to the current economic situation. I mean, I even think of my own personal situation. I got laid off a couple months back, and there are lots of games that I want to play right now that I have had to forego buying because I'm having to be very frugal,
Hmm.
and pick and choose uh, what I do with my money. Um, and I, you know, I like I mentioned, me getting the Switch 2 was because I got a really good trade-in deal on another console. And there are some games that I want to play on it. There's an old backlog of Switch games I want to play, but I probably won't be buying any new games for it. I won't be buying any $80 games
Right.
until I feel like I'm in a spot where I can justify that at the moment. Um, and and I think that kind of is the crux of the argument with everything in terms of games getting more expensive, games and consoles and everything. Is I think we're in a spot right now where people's wallets are a lot tighter than they were even just 5-10 years ago in like the PS4 and the Switch 1 era. Like I think
Right.
we're in a really hard cost of living moment right now, and it's hard to look at these things getting more expensive and go, well, I'm not going to eat for a week so I can play my favorite games. Like,
Right. And you have to think about it too. It's not just they're trying to sell you an $80 games. You know, you have to think about the devs have to eat too, is what I'll say on that too, right? You know, you can look at Expedition 33, for example, selling their game for $50, right? But they're a smaller team. And now there is that argument to be said, right? Um, I think there is a good chance we're going to see more games from of the similar statue that Expedition and Sandfall Interactive had, right? Where these people are leaving, these big AAA studios, make doing their passion project pretty much, and being able to make a profit, right? Because there is that hunger, um, for these lower price and fantastic games that have been coming out, right?
yeah,
Um, and I think this is it also becomes a good opportunity, but you can't just say that, hey, I'm not going to buy, how did you justify this $80 price point? Because there's a lot of mathematics, there's a lot of accounting that goes on to why a game costs $80, right?
well,
So,
and you brought up something interesting there, you know, talking about like the devs needing to eat. I think, you know, there is something to be said for corporate bloat. I
yeah,
think, you
exactly.
know,
Yep. Hmm.
there's dev cost of a game has gotten so high these days. And I mean, you look at some of these AAA games that have 45-minute long credits,
Hmm.
because there's hundreds and hundreds of people that need to be accounted for. Um, I look at, you know, some of the gacha games that I play that are free to play games, that have 500, 1,000 devs on them, that are some of the biggest dev teams in history.
Hmm.
And figuring out how to, you know, make that financially work has led to $80 games. And I think, you bring up Sandfall Interactive, their core team was about 30 members. They had contractors they worked with and stuff. There are more than 30 people who worked on that game, but their core team was about 30 people. And the math on that allows a game to be sold for $30 or $50.
Right.
And I do think, we as consumers should support those smaller teams when they do make a good game. I'm not saying you should just support a smaller team just because we think smaller teams are better. Like when those games come out, they deserve that support. And I think, that is kind of how we can show, we do want to support devs. We do want to support game development. What we don't want to support is,
Corporate
way
greed,
too
pretty
much
much.
corporate greed and corporate bloat.
Right.
And I think there are things that can be done to keep game prices down. And I think indie studios and smaller studios are doing that. And I think in a time where we are kind of in a bad economic way, where those $80 price tags hurt, now is the time as gamers to really take the step back and look at those indie companies and say, no, I am going to support a game like Expedition 33. Or, like I said, I bought Night Rain for $40. I'm excited at the idea of a studio like From Software investing in a smaller side team to make a side project. Am I expecting it to be the same kind of game as their main team? No, but I'm excited to support that kind of project and spend less money in doing it.
Right. And, kind of wrap this topic up, right? The best way for your opinion to be heard is with your wallet. You don't have to buy the $80 game, right? You don't have to do it. You can support these games that, these indie games or any games that you kind of feel like deserve your money, right? Whether that be, $60 or $70, whatever that price point may be. Vote with your wallet, because that's where it really counts, right?
Yep.
That's what the publishers are looking at, and it's like, wow, why didn't this sell for very well? It's like there's a lot of variables there, right? But one of the variables could be that $80 price point. So at the end of the day, vote with your wallet.
Absolutely. So we talked about, like with the cost of games and supporting devs and things like that, and like passion projects. And we kind of talked about this a bit earlier, but there were some tweets recently from some VAs
Right.
about different games. And I think, devs do get passionate about the games they make, and they do want to be a part of the art that is video games. And it was a tweet from Yuri Lowenthal about a Persona 4 remake, and I think we have it here. So he says, and for those who keep asking, no, I will not be returning as Yosuke for the Persona 4 remake. I ask, maybe I even begged, but they don't want me to come back. And that idea that he begged, like, devs are super passionate about games and wanting to be a part of it. And
VAs,
I think
VAs.
in this instance, we're talking about VAs and kind of moving forward into that. There's been a lot of stuff going on with the VA industry for video games lately. You and I have talked about it a ton offline with some different games and things we like. With this tweet, though, specifically, I think why it's garnering a lot of attention is because he mentions a Persona 4 remake.
Right. And, I kind of want to touch on this, right? The other voice actor for Aaron Fitzgerald, she voiced Chie. in Persona 4 Golden and onward, right? And I guess not at this point, because she basically just says, "Hey, for those who are asking, I've not been asked to reprise my role as Chie, and I believe there are more voice actors that I don't have in our doc over here that also basically said the same thing, right? I think you have Yukiko's voice actor that said, "Hey, I'm not going to be in the remake. I wasn't asked," right? I
So do
also
you
want to
think
preface
this is
this.
confirmation of an actual Persona 4 remake?
It's good that you bring that up. Okay, there's two sides to this, right? There's two sides to this. Um, do I think a Persona 4 remake exists? Yes, I do. Do I think this confirms the Persona 4 remake? I do not. Right? I think these are people that specifically asked Yuri Lowenthal if he's going to be returning as Yosuke, and he said no. Um, he did ask. I don't think, if it was a thing, you know, I don't think they would have. It's a difficult conversation because you're trying to read into a tweet, or in this case, it was a Blue Sky post, right? You're trying to read into this very very like deeply, and this post has since been deleted. By the way, I just want to also mention that,
Oh,
right?
interesting.
So, but he asked, and I don't know if Sega Atlas has the kind of pull to be like, do we talk about that with him, right? You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Um,
Well,
so
and I kind of wonder if it's that thing of him saying, "Hey guys, by the way, if you do a Persona 4 remake, I'd really love to be in it." And like him kind of
uh,
being like a "by the way," and they're all like, "No, we're not having you back." Like,
right. I mean, do I like going back to, do I think Persona 4 remake is coming? I do, right? Do I think that this hard confirms Persona 4 remake? I do not. The reason why Aaron Fitzgerald, Chie's voice actor, Yukiko's voice actor, um, it's because people have been bothering them about it, right? And they basically like, stop bothering me, basically about this, right? So stop asking. I'm not part of it. I've also seen theories. Now this is like tinfoil hat on kind of theory, right? Um, it There's a theory where all of these voice actors who have come forward and said, "No, I'm not in the Persona 4 remake," are the people that were your party members in that order, right? So you have Yosuke, and then you have Chie, and then you have Yukiko in that exact order, right? And they're like, "Oh my god, what if this is a PR stunt?" And I'm just over here, just like, what if this is a PR stunt? And I'm like, okay, you need to like press the brakes here a little bit. Now that would be a pretty elaborate PR stunt, in my opinion, if that were to happen, right? But I don't think that's the case. Um, I think these are just people that are asking for that.
well, and you kind of bring up an interesting thing in that idea of like the tinfoil hat, like the internet kind of reading into things and saying things. So there's been a lot going on with VAs in the last year or so, and this idea of like VAs getting replaced.
Mhm.
And the internet really likes to run with this information and talk about it when we don't necessarily have all the pieces, all the information of what's going on. So, like this idea that Yosuke could be voiced by someone entirely different in the remake because Yuri wasn't asked to come back. We're kind of running with this information that like, oh, so Persona 4 remake is happening and they're replacing the VAs when it could not be happening yet, and that's why they haven't been asked to come back yet.
Right.
But I even think about like in the last year, so I play a lot of gacha games. We've talked about this before.
Mhm.
And there's a company, HoYoverse, who makes some of the biggest gacha games around, Honkai Star Rail, Genshin Impact. And they actually had a VA get replaced. Well, they've had several VAs in their games get replaced, but in one of their biggest games, Genshin, they had a VA get replaced. And a lot of drama ensued very quickly of people going after the new VA, saying that he was scalping and taking the old VA's job. And it got to this point that honestly, I don't know what the full situation was, because there was so much speculation and stuff going on the internet of people saying, well, this is why it's happened, or so and so said this, or so and so put this out. And not even just in the internet, but on the VA community, like other VAs saying things about different people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times the internet really does run with this idea that they don't have the full information, but they're gonna throw a whole narrative out. And really all that we know is that some VAs have been replaced. And part of that could have to do with the SAG-AFTRA strike. We are seeing a lot of non-union VAs get put in to these roles recently. And I know we've talked about kind of some of the different VA studios in and out of the US in the past. Specifically games with European voice acting casts. We both have a commonality in playing some games with these European VAs. I would think about Final Fantasy 14. I mean, like, how do you feel about the FF14 VAs comparatively to like the American studios?
Right. And I wanna start this conversation of comparing the A Realm Reborn voice actors to Heaven's Wards and onwards, pretty much, right? Now I do like the Heaven's Ward and above cast, right? A lot better than the Realm Reborn. Now it did have character. I know some people have differing opinions. I think it's just because, you know, it's that emotional connection with that, right? So maybe if I played during ARR, I think maybe I would have had more of an emotional attachment to the people that voice these characters, for example. And that's why I think these people that are getting mad about Persona 4 remake um is because, you know, these voice actors, they, you know, they pretty much have been doing those roles for, when did Persona 4 Golden come out, like 2008 or something like that? It's been like
Nearly 20 years.
Nearly 20 years, right? Um yeah, so, you know, these voice actors have been, they've been they've been in people's lives pretty much, right? Um and it's very hard to kind of shift, and that's one thing about humans, is that we don't really like change a lot, right? We don't really like change. But to go back to your point, I do like the European casts for these games. I know we were talking about Xenoblade. Xenoblade is predominantly um European cast, right? Final Fantasy 16, Expedition 33 onwards, you know, etc., etc. Um, Now, I think a good topic to talk about too is, you know, we talk about voice actors, and there was a lot of, this might be a little side tangent here. We talked about voice actors, and I remember when Dawn Chill came out. Do you remember Wook Lamont, voice actor, right?
I do.
People did not enjoy her voice acting, or they actually, I'm gonna actually preface this even further. The voice acting in Dawn Trail was not comparable to the other two expansions, right? The previous two expansions that came out before it, right? Um, and that's honestly, in my opinion, not the fault of the actor, right? It's a fault with with direction, right? Game vocal direction, right? I know at that point, they did. I think Koji Fox was on 16 at that point, right? He was doing directions. I think he might have been supervising. Um, but there was a different person that was doing it, and, you know, bless her heart, I think she does it. She's fantastic at, you know, basically it's hard. It's big shoes to fill for Koji, right?
Yeah.
Bless her heart. It's definitely, the direction definitely has gotten better with the most recent patches, right? But you know, and kind of to end this side tangent, it really depends, right? I think anybody can act really, really good. Especially if you're at this level, you're getting cast in these video games, right? You're getting cast for a reason because they think, they have faith that you can act as this role, right? Um, you know, it comes down to not only these actors, but it also comes down to who's directing them, and who is, writing for these characters that will ultimately bring these characters to life, right? Um, so
So I think there's a couple pieces that you talked about there that I want to hit on. Um, Definitely the idea. You talked about the localization directors and kind of their directing. Koji working with 16, and Kate coming in for Dawn Trail.
mhm,
And I think the localization is a part of it. I think there's also the actual VA directors, like the studios they're contracting out to. I think a great example of this, what you're saying of the direction, and maybe you'll be able to find this clip. But people have done side by sides. They actually went back and re-recorded and redirected some of Wooklamot's lines.
oh, the Sphene line, I remember
Yeah,
that.
and the
Hmm.
first version of it is very flat, and the second version is so much more emotion filled, and that comes down to directing. But I think it's interesting because definitely Dawn Trail, uh, set in the Americas, I think to try and capture some of that, they went with a lot of American VAs and went through the American studios. Um, and at least within the 14 community, we did feel a noticeable difference between those
Hmm.
previous expansions. Um, and that's not to say that the actors were bad, but there definitely has been a difference in the VA quality of what we're seeing coming out of those European studios. I feel like in capturing emotions. I
Right.
haven't played Expedition 33 yet, but like Expedition 33, a lot of people are talking about the performance and the story being really good.
Hmm.
Ben Starr has kind of been this huge breakout hit since Final Fantasy 16. He's in Expedition 33. He's been in a lot of things.
Right.
Um, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Ben is a British VA. He's working with those British studios on
Hmm.
these games.
Yeah, and I had the pleasure of meeting him at PAX West. Was it last year, 2024? Very nice dude, by the way. Very, very nice gentleman. Um, and I want to touch on Expedition 33 for a little bit and their voice acting. I think, you know, when Jeff Keighley's event comes around at the end of the year, I genuinely think that Ben Starr and Jennifer English are probably going to win the awards, in my opinion. They gave a fantastic performance, and Christy Riddler, who voiced Lune, Andy Serkis, um, Golem, right? From Lord of the Rings, and then also as the antagonist here in Expedition 33. And you also have Charlie Cox, right? I was looking the other day. I was looking, actually not the other day, it was today. This was Charlie Cox's first video game. Did you know that?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, apparently, um, this is. I looked on his Wikipedia page, and you can correct me if you're looking at it right now.
Yeah, I'm looking it up.
This was Charlie Cox's first video game because I was like, I was talking to my coworker about it, and he was like, "Oh yeah, it's the same guy that did Luigi, right? In the Super Mario Brothers movie." Right? I was like, "No, I think you're thinking of that guy from Always Sunny. They're two completely different people." Um, they do look very similar. But to go back on, the quality of, some of the European casts, I don't know if it's the accent. I don't know if it's just the direction. I think they've been knocking it out of the park, and I don't see and I can get why people are casting them, right? Because they've been hitting it out of the park for so long, right? Um,
Yeah, and the thing is like I have to imagine I don't think that's on like the actors themselves,
mhm,
because I know we have incredibly very talented actors here in the U.S.
mhm,
I mean, we're known for it. We're known for Hollywood and stuff. Um, but I think within the VA industry, there's something going on with the direction. There's something going on with the direction and capturing those performances and those emotions that, like, I think it's possible. We've seen it done. I think of games like The Last of Us, incredible performances in The Last of Us.
oh, God of
But
War. That's the
God
most
of
notable
War,
one.
God
Yeah.
of War is incredible. Like those performances do happen. Um, but there has been this amazing consistency coming out of the European studios recently.
Mhm.
Um, and I could see a lot of video game companies looking at stuff like what's going on um, with the strike right now and seeing that they have this option to replace VAs with non-union VAs out in Europe, and saying, people like their performances. We're not having to worry about things going on with this strike. Let's just contract out to these non-union VAs. Let's just do
Mhm.
that. Um, I think it's something that's going to be more prominent in the years to come, that we're going to see a wider array. I think maybe there's been like 4 or 5 big VA studios in the US that have kind of had a chokehold on the industry. And I think we're going to see a huge diversification in the next 4 to 5 years,
Yeah.
particularly
Mhm.
into the European studios.
And I want to preface this too. We 100 we are behind them 100% on their strike, right? I do think, the at least I am. I'm like 100% on their side because, I get what they're trying to do. Their main goal was to, you know, prevent them from being misrepresented you know, as AI pretty much, using their voice, their likeliness as AI, right? And I get that, right? So,
Yeah, I
just want to preface
100%
that.
support the VAs and the workers. Like
Hmm.
in terms of the intricacies of the strike and what's being asked for and like the negotiations, I don't have all that information. So like I don't fully want to speak out on that, but I will always say I am pro the workers and the
Right.
VAs getting
Hmm.
paid for their work and being able to continue their work. um I don't want it to come off in any way that like I don't support them. uh
Hmm.
but I think there is an interesting discussion to be had of what the long-term effects of this strike are going to be, and non-union VAs coming into more of a front face of the industry,
Right.
and working with
Hmm.
those European studios.
Yeah, it's because these studios, they're on schedules, right? And if you're unavailable, they're just gonna, unfortunately, they're gonna go somewhere else, right? So.
Well, and you think about like live service games, something like Final Fantasy 14 or something like Genshin, where like they're putting out updates every couple months or
Hmm.
every like it's not like a game that is going to be an instant release that, like Expedition 33, if they needed to change someone like during production or whatever, they could do that or move around schedules and things like that. But if a game's got an update coming out, like they got to get that stuff done in the
Right.
live
Hmm.
service era. Like if you're not available and you're not ready to go, like they've got to you're going to get replaced. That
Right. And
sucks, but like it's what happens.
yeah. Okay. Side tangent number two for me on this on this topic, right? So we were talking about Final Fantasy 14 for a little bit, right? And there is one voice actor in particular I wanted to bring up. the voice actor for Grahatia, Jonathan Bailey. He's
Okay.
extremely famous now. He's in the new Jurassic Park. He was in Wicked, right? Mr. Bridgerton, he was in Bridgerton, and he's getting more and more and more roles, right?
Yeah.
Um, so do you think, this is kind of like a Final Fantasy 14 discussion now. Do you think we will probably be seeing less of that character because the voice actor is not going to be as available as much?
So we've said this a couple times, but I think it depends.
Yeah.
The thing is I think Grahatia is such a beloved character that I think we will continue to see him in the game. Maybe they put him in quest lines that are less voice acted.
Yeah.
Because 14 is notably not entirely voice acted. So I think that's one way around it. But I also think most of the people who do voice act in Final Fantasy 14 like Final Fantasy 14.
Hmm.
So this is kind of a noticeable difference. I keep bringing up Genshin and gachas and things like that. That community, the gacha community, is kind of known for being rough on the VAs, and
Right.
being fairly judgmental on their performances. And there are a lot of VAs in those games that just do not interact with the community. They do not respond to them on Twitter. They don't do any kind of convention appearances, stuff like that. Like, they do not interact with them, full stop.
Hmm.
The FF14 community is very kind to their VAs
Right.
comparably. I know there has been stuff, especially since Dawn Trail came out. But I do feel like the FF14 community has been more excited about, like, Grahatia's VA, for example. And I could see the Grahatia VA wanting to continue to work on the game, like,
Hmm.
over other projects. I think he may be getting famous enough that, he needs the, like, he'll take the bigger paychecks and things like that. But I think most actors enjoy being a part of something that they like and being a part of a piece of art that they enjoy. And
Right.
so I see him coming back and making the time because, as far as I'm aware, 14 has been a good experience for him.
And he has confirmed that, right? I was watching an interview with him. He did a little thing where he was going through all of his roles that he's done, Bridgerton and other stuff like that. And he was rolling a dice, and one of the things was Rahatia, and he was like, he loves that character so much. He calls it, all of his lines Shakespearean, pretty much, right? Which is a very good way of putting it. So, um, to kind of put a bow on this topic, right? We were talking about the recasting of VAs, and um, is it a good or bad thing? And I think my opinion is it depends, right? If you are a beloved cast, then there's going to be uproar, but I don't think it's the end of the world. And I think, in my opinion, in this situation with the Persona 4 remake, I think I think it would be fine. I'm going to be honest with you. I think they did a good job with Persona 3 Reload, uh, and yeah.
Yeah, I think, to sum up my thoughts on it, I think for the VAs, for the workers, yes, it's a bad thing to lose a role and get replaced. I understand that. I think on the gamer end of, like, is it going to be bad for us in the games? Are the games going to be worse? I think maybe it's too soon to say that. I think they'll probably still bring on incredible VAs. I think there are incredible talent pools. And, take Persona 4 as the example. Like, did we grow up with Yuri as the voice of Yosuke? And is there an emotional attachment there? Yes. But look at the Persona 3 Reload. That had new VAs in it and different VAs, and people have loved Persona 3
Hmm.
Reload. It has gotten tons of critical acclaim. Um, so I don't I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for the game industry as a whole and for gamers. I think we're going to see some good things from it. But I do feel bad for VAs that are maybe losing a gig because they're getting replaced.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
And that's the podcast for today. I think there's been a lot going on. These were two topics that were fun to tackle and talk about. Let us know kind of what you guys think in the comments wherever you're listening or watching this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on game prices, where you kind of feel is the upper limit of what you're willing to spend on a game or a console. And if you have a favorite VA performance in a game, tell us. We want to know what was the performance that for you just was like, this was perfect. No other person can ever voice this character again. But we'll be back with more. Thanks for listening, and we hope to see you next time.
See you guys later.